Well, often it's culture. Culture sort of
Okay.
sets the tone for the company, and our HR practice is very experienced at helping people think through that
Hmm.
and sort of focus on what's important to pull that together, including messaging and sometimes rebuilding trust and so forth within the company. So I would say culture is just incredibly important. So if that's broken, that's really a place that you should look first.
So everyone will transition out of their business at some point, and at that point, you're going to want to your business to be valuable. So why not start working on value right now? Today, I have the opportunity to sit down with Ellen Wood, co-founder and CEO of VCFO, and we're going to look at areas of your business outside of your P&L where you can actually build value for an exit or future exit. But we're going to do it through a financial lens. So, welcome to the show, Ellen.
Thank you, Lee. It's great to be here this afternoon and talking about some of my very favorite topics. I can't have a conversation that isn't through a financial lens. It's just I'm hardwired that way. So I really love the idea of looking at elements beyond the financials, though, because there is so much that businesses need to pay attention to and include in their strategic planning to have an optimal experience when it comes time to either exit their company, but also people don't always think about the fact that it's important to have significant value all throughout the life of the company. It's not something that you want to wait till the very end when you can see an exit on the horizon and then start thinking about things you could have been doing. Reasons for that, you may have wanted to do an acquisition along the way, and your
Mm-hmm.
value is important at an acquisition. You may have wanted to raise capital. That's based on how much you're worth. How much dilution you take is based on how much you're worth. So I just think it's important for so many reasons. In fact, it is so important here at VCFO that about a year and a half ago, we developed a strategic roadmap, and we actually take all our clients through it when they come on board. And they're not coming on board with us because they're ready to exit most of the time. Most of the time, they're coming on board because they want to grow and they're at a point where they need expertise that they haven't had before. But one of the things that we want to help them do is look first through the financial lens that everybody's going to look through and say, well,
Mm-hmm.
right now, your EBITDA, earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization, we all know that term. Right now, that's this number, whatever that number may be. And industry multiples generally is an easy way to look at your value. You say
Mm-hmm.
maybe you're worth 2 times EBITDA or 10 times EBITDA. There's a number there. But that is just the starting point. The thing that
Mm-hmm.
you need to think about is 6 other critical areas. And these are areas that if you've been through an exit, you're well aware of it because they looked at them and they either marked you up or they marked you down because of how you were doing on them.
Right.
And so what we like to do is introduce those earlier in the life of a client so that when they get there, they're already optimized. So just to kind of lay those out for you, the first one is because we're financial people and it is important, is profits and cash flow. Are you
Okay.
optimized for your profits and cash flow? That involves some benchmarking and traditional things that many people have probably experienced. But also looking at your leadership team. Is it deep
Mm-hmm.
enough? Do you have the right people on board? Is your company completely dependent on you? What happens if, somebody comes in and buys your company and you don't want to stay with it and you were incredibly important to the success of it or
Right.
the ongoing success of it? Another one's infrastructure. Have you been cheap on the infrastructure? Have you basically deferred maintenance by not putting the right systems in place over time? And there's a big bill that's waiting to come due for somebody that steps in. An incredibly important one is going to be your people. The way you treat your people, how they feel about your company. Are they partners or are they detractors? We here use a survey system. We use a program called Workify, which is a really really good one. I'd recommend. But we want to hear from people throughout and make sure that the things that they're worried about or that we could do better, we're addressing as we go. That all rolls into our culture. And in VCFO, our culture, people first.
Mm-hmm.
It used to be customers first, and customers were very important. They're second, but it's people first here at VCFO. And then the final one is risk management because there's risks for everybody, and anybody that's taking a look at your business is going to want to know that you've thought about them. You're either insured against them or you've diversified, perhaps your client base. You don't have client concentration and things like that. You're aware of all the regulatory risk that's out there that's affecting your business and changes from the political climates, which we've certainly seen of late, how all those things might be impacting you. So we take a look at those 6 things. We help our clients understand your worth traditionally this right
Mhm.
now sort of as a starting point. But if you optimized all of these things, our experience of more than 6,000 clients in 28 years tells us that you could be worth this much more
Mhm.
just by optimizing these 6 other non-financial statement items. And so that was a rather long answer, I think, to your question, but we're really passionate about it here. And we
Yeah.
think it's so important that we roll it into the first 30 days with each new client.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks for that. It's a great intro to everything that you guys are doing. And as we look at these sort of 6 areas, the first question that comes to mind is when you go in and look at a company, what is the most glaring problem that you see? I mean, outside of the financials, what is the biggest one that you think you want to attack first with your clients?
Well, often it's culture. Culture sort of
Okay.
sets the tone for the company, and our HR practice is very experienced at helping people think through that
Hmm.
and sort of focus on what's important to pull that together, including messaging and sometimes rebuilding trust and so forth within the company. So I would say culture is just incredibly important. So if that's broken, that's really a place that you should look first.
Yeah, that seems like it would be the hardest one to start with, since the culture is the DNA of the company. How do you address culture, especially if you're doing it right out of the gate? How do you go in and say, "Hey, your culture's broken"?
Well, that's a tricky conversation,
Yeah,
but and I would say that it would be presumptuous for us to go in on day one and say something like
that's
that. So
true.
it's probably not the day one thing that we would be identified,
Hmm.
but in terms of the most important thing to focus on, if it's out of whack, I would say that's where it is.
Okay.
So we would help them with probably some baseline assessment testing using a tool similar to what I suggested earlier.
Hmm.
We would do a lot of interviews of the staff and the leadership to see what was going on and what was important to people. And particularly, depending on the structure of the company, whether it be owned by a small founding group or a larger entity that has expanded over time,
Hmm.
what's the core belief set of the folks that drive that company? Because we always have to remember we're there to support the shareholders that own that particular company.
Right. Yeah, for sure. Of so the biggest problem you see is culture. Do you think that fixing culture provides the most value?
Well, let me be more clear. I didn't mean to say it's always the most important problem, but if
Okay.
it's broken, it's the one that I would focus on first
I
before
agree.
we rolled
I
it.
see it. I see it
Yeah,
too. I agree.
other things follow behind that, but
True.
it's hard to underestimate the value enhancement of having your culture in the right place.
Hmm.
It affects everybody, everything, the way you interact with your customers, the way you interact, of course, internally, the way you interact with the community. It's a huge driver.
Yeah, I see it. At every client I've worked with, I get to sort of be a guest at their house and see how the family operates.
That's a good way
You
to
know,
put it.
you
That's
know,
that's a
I
very, yeah.
yeah, I'm invited for dinner and I get to see their nuances and who likes this and doesn't like that, and who likes who and who doesn't like whom. And it's interesting to say the least. And the ones that are doing well, it just seems very seamless and natural. Whether it's this kind, the culture is kind of leans this way or that way. It doesn't matter. It's really more about it's a natural kind of seamless thing that everyone is feels like they're in the same boat, rowing in the same direction. But when that's broken, it's very clear that it's broken, and it's not clear. It's clear to me because I'm coming from the outside, but it's not clear usually to leadership.
Well, it's different degrees of broken too. You can be broken, and really need some
Hmm.
fixing. You may have some, what people would refer to as internal terrorists, right? That you have to
Hmm.
deal with. Um, and then there's messaging. So sometimes what really is necessary is help getting the culture that is a good culture,
Mm-hmm.
messaged effectively throughout the community. But then it's critical, it's absolutely critical to live that culture. And
Yeah.
here at VCFO, we use a program called the Entrepreneurial Operating System, or
Oh yeah.
EOS. And for those of you that are familiar with that, it's from the book Traction.
Mm-hmm.
And we've been using it, I guess we adopted it in 2018. But in order to really bring that in, we use that in our hiring, in our recruiting. We actually evaluate our candidates against whether they fit our culture.
Mm-hmm.
We use it in our periodic internal reviews. Do our people fit our culture? Because you have to honestly assess that, and then help folks that aren't really a fit with your culture find
Mm-hmm.
their way to the culture that works for them.
For sure. And I think if you're looking at it from the perspective of a buyer or an investor, um, this is going to be a very important one to know that it's handled. I've seen a lot of smaller companies where founder is the CEO and they become the bottleneck. They remain the bottleneck for various reasons, and you end up with sort of a toxic culture, um, where everything really has to be passed through this one individual for it to do any good. I know you've probably seen this too, and I think as an investor looking at the company, of course, you're looking at the financials, but once you get past that, and usually in part of that process of looking at the financials, looking at the business, you're going to start to see that the company is divided. Some people think one way and some people think another, and usually it comes back to the CEO or whoever is running the ship. And so that would lead me to believe that the next most important one is who is your CEO and who is running the company. That's probably going to be, I don't know if that was one of your six categories, but leadership in general has got to be a huge one for a huge value driver outside the financials.
Absolutely. And the CEO is important, but also incredibly important is the rest of the team.
Mm-hmm.
And another very, very important element of EOS is what they call the accountability chart. And I've got to tell you, when we put that in 2018, how old were we? We were, 20 years old already. And I thought,
Mm-hmm.
oh my goodness, of course we all know what our jobs are, right?
Yeah.
And I was really wrong. And so, but actually, it's a little bit different than an org chart, but actually defining what everybody is responsible for
Mm-hmm.
from their areas of responsibility, the specifics of what they do, but also their level of decision making, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because to your point about bottleneck, I mean, I know I've been the bottleneck on more than one occasion and had to actually, fess up to it and do
Mm-hmm.
something about it. But delegation's important, but being clear what you've delegated is equally as important,
Yes.
and making sure that that's visible to everybody and that you live that.
Right. Okay. Well, then, since we're talking about the leadership team, what else can you say about the value that can be extracted or created by looking further into building a leadership team, as it relates to the value of the company?
Well, I think it's critical. If you think about the types of buyers that are out there and the reasons that they would buy your company, you don't. If you're a founder, you most likely are not looking for someone that's going to tie you up to the company for another 5 years. First
Right.
place, you're probably not great at reporting to someone else, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, most people are not thinking that way. So if it takes you to make every decision or the majority of the decisions, then you've devalued your company. You need to
Mm-hmm.
empower your leadership team to take those responsibilities and really sell their expertise, experience, and abilities to, as part of your pitch in whatever sale transaction you're going through.
Mm-hmm.
So, not every company can afford, a significant, you have to add leadership as you can afford it, but you should really invest in that and then empower them.
So, how someone gets bought or who they get bought by, there's nuances to all the deals, right? But is there some kind of central theme or thread for how leadership teams can be built so that they are ready and poised to work with or fit in to the buyer? Talking about a strategic buyer, in maybe in the industry, there's all kinds of different ways that a company can get bought and brought into another company. Is there sort of a best practice for developing a leadership team that's going to look really, look and work really well with the buying company?
That's a good question. And you're so right. There are so many different kinds of buyers, from the folks that might be a PE buying you as a
Mm-hmm.
platform play, right? Where they
Right.
really want you and your leadership team to be capable of being quickly the platform for acquisitions that roll on.
Yeah.
That's one set of, preparation that might be going on.
Mm-hmm.
Not a lot of people go into business knowing that they're going to be a platform play for somebody, though.
Exactly.
So I'm a big fan of hire high. Hire someone that's is smarter than me for sure,
Yeah.
and empower them. And those are the types of people that virtually any acquirer who's interested in a leadership team is going to be happy to pick up as part of the deal. And then ensuring that they work together as a team. You need to be an accountable team
Mm-hmm.
and not a group of superstars or individual high performers or an occasional terrorist, as I said, right?
Yeah, I like that. I guess where it takes me is, as I'm thinking about what you're saying, is it kind of goes back to systems. I guess culture and systems. So like you're talking about EOS, that's a great kind of rule book to live by, and it works for a lot of companies. But whether it's EOS or something else, I think having your foundation of systems that you operate by and your leadership is trained by and leads by is going to be foundational for any company that's going to look at it, be able to assess the value of what that is. It's going to be easier to, I think that's a piece of what you're doing too, is not only what is the actual value, but how is that perceived, because they can actually assess it. And then the value is being rolled up into that other company. Again, various ways that someone can be bought, but I think that culture and systems is a great way to sort of draw a framework around leadership so that the value can be understood and translated.
I think you're right. I think that's very important. And you're exactly right about EOS. It's not the only system out there by any
Mhm.
means. What I love about it is it's simple. It speaks to everybody in the company. There's a communication protocol from top to bottom and bottom to top,
Mhm.
which is, I think, as a buyer, it's comforting to know that that kind of communication has been going on, because often that's going to be one of those major employee complaints is we don't hear enough about what's going on. Nobody tells us what's going on, that kind of thing. When I
Yeah,
think about the kinds of things that you hear. So I think that's been a huge help. And then again, the fact that they made it simple. They pulled together some important
that's true.
components, and they'll tell you themselves in the book, they'll say, hey, this isn't, all of this is not unique.
Mhm.
But what we've done is we've organized it in a way that it's not complicated to follow, and it works for everyone.
Yeah, and it's great for accountability. I know that's sort of like an undertone of what you're saying, but
Absolutely.
just to call it out, I mean, I think accountability is great for each individual. If each individual person knows their role, it is clear to everyone, and can communicate, between each one, and then you're held accountable to the. I think they call them rocks, and all the milestones. I think that's a really good system, because if you're there to see the company prosper, then you're going to take much more ownership over your role. If you know you're held accountable to it, and you're essentially gonna want to be held accountable to it.
Well, it's also helpful when you have a problem come in the door. You know where to go and who
Mm-hmm.
needs to work on it. And I frequently, not as frequently today, probably as 2 years ago, but I have often commented that I give it a lot of the credit for how well we pivoted when COVID hit.
Mm.
We put it in place in 2018, second half of the year. 2019 was our first year on EOS. It was our best year ever. And then here comes COVID in 2020, right? I happened to be out of the country in the week they decided to shut Austin down, and I'm based here in Austin, Texas.
Yeah.
And so within a week, we had pivoted in our own offices. We're working remotely. Everything was remote. Everybody knew what they were responsible for and
Mm-hmm.
took the initiative to address the pieces that needed to work successfully. So to me, that was a real test under fire. Who saw that coming?
That's amazing, and what a great response, and testimony to the system and to your people, to adhere to the system.
Oh, I have
Um,
great people.
Yeah, that's awesome. So I think one of the other things you mentioned was client mix or diversification of clients. To me, I would think this would be a huge value driver in a business.
Well, it is. And, I don't hold myself out to be a marketing expert, but as a financial
Mhm.
professional, when I'm looking at a company or a client or a prospect that's got, a heavy, heavy, heavy concentration with just a handful of clients, that is a red flag because there's a big vulnerability there. And
Mhm.
so, one of the things that we encourage our clients to do through this strategic roadmap is to really look carefully at their client mix, not just
Mhm.
from a profitability perspective, but from a diversity in not being vulnerable in any particular location. So a vulnerability in that area would be a risk under risk management that definitely is an area, and that's something that would be concerning to a buyer.
And what does that look like practically? Is it making sure you're not top heavy with certain clients, or someone's paying 60% of your revenue, or is it more nuanced than that?
Actually, it's all of those things. And to give you real life examples, we've had folks that have found themselves in surprisingly long receivables flows.
Mm.
Great contract, looks like it's going to be wonderful,
Mhm.
but they don't have enough financial resources to wait for that client to pay under that client's terms. So
Right.
that's where you should be strategically looking ahead and making sure you have lines of credit and whatever else adequate capital to take those. I've had other situations where clients have had super exciting agreements with big box operations,
Yeah.
not realizing that they also have very long cycles. They have big, rights to return. They have
Hmm.
all of the things that you can have when you're the big player in a negotiation. And so
That's
thinking
right.
ahead to those kinds of things is very important too.
Yeah, we had a consumer brand expert on talking about all of that on I don't know 4 or 5 episodes ago, and it's just very eye opening to see how little control you really have over a lot of the distribution, and what goes from one hand to the next. And a lot of it's your cash just sitting out there waiting to be either spent or burnt or returned. So I thought that was very eye opening talking to her.
Well, it really is, and so it's a plus for you on top of your valuation if you have a diverse client base where no one single change, either in the industry or with a
Hmm.
purchaser's decision, is going to put you on the edge of profitability or worse, take you down.
Hmm.
That's definitely a plus, and it's a negative as well if you do.
Yeah, looking at the DNA at companies that I see is you have a variety of people. Some people are very risk averse. Some people are very risky. Some people are in survival mode all the time, and some people think the money's never going to run out. I mean, there's all kinds of different perspectives and personalities that lead companies, and some people are really focused on making sure that they are solidly diversified, and they will over index their time on this one aspect, but they will forget about culture, or they'll forget about these
Mhm.
other value drivers. And I honestly think that people kind of go towards their bent. If you're kind of wired a certain way, you're going to naturally lead in that way, and the company's going to follow suit. And so that's why it's so great to talk about all of these different drivers, because not I don't think any one person's really got a bent in every area. They're usually going one or two areas maybe maximum, but there's other areas you have to learn from. I don't know why that came in my mind when we were talking about this, but I just know I've seen people over index on diversification, and I applaud that. I'm like, this is great. You got a really solid business here, revenue's good, and you don't really have to worry about going out of business. But there's some other things that we should probably address that are not going to make you thrive as a business, or not going to make you a perfect perfectly suited for a buyer. So that's why it's so great that all these are so different, right? I mean, from client mix to leadership team to culture, there's always somewhere to work on your business. Um,
That's the truth,
yeah,
always.
there is. You mentioned maybe earlier or on our pre-call talking about governance risk. and that there was you had some type of an assessment to look at those risks. Can you speak to that?
I may have been talking about the V360 program, which is our
Oh, okay,
strategic
yeah,
roadmap, which
yeah,
has an element for risk management, because one of the areas really within risk management is your governance.
okay,
Because you can't just set yourself up as a C Corp or a partnership or whatever. You actually have to follow the rules
hmm
that those entities require, or you can be, discarded. It can be looked through as if you
hmm
don't have the protective corporate envelope that you set out to have.
yeah,
So you need to have those board meetings. You need to document those major decisions. You need to treat the company like a company and not your checkbook. Of course, that would be for a smaller company, but you'd be
yeah,
surprised. Maybe you
sure,
wouldn't be surprised how many companies I've seen of substantial size that still have
yeah,
some problems with that. And so it's very important to pay attention to what good corporate governance is. Again, I'm not a lawyer. Sometimes we'll bring the corporate lawyer in to work
hmm
with the company board if we see a problem in that area. But that's something that your buyer down the road, and frankly, anybody who's doing due diligence for any kind of transaction that might be happening along the way, they're going to
hmm
be looking at those documents. That's part of the normal requests that come. So you
right,
should be prepared.
yeah, for sure. Um, talking about using it as your personal bank account, it's funny because I wouldn't be surprised because I've seen a lot, but I think a lot of people would that haven't had the chance to look behind the curtain on a lot of companies, how big of companies still operate without legitimate books and governance in place and these type of things. And those are kind of the ones that I'm referring to that end up with toxic cultures and bottleneck CEOs and those kind of things. It's really funny that in a free market, you can bring a product to market, and if it is a really good fit and the need is strong, and sometimes it can be government contract, it can be something that is just a plug and play solution, and it doesn't really take all of the branding and the thinking about strategy. It doesn't take any of that. It's just really there's a buyer, and you're the seller, and there happens to be a really high margin in what you're selling. Those people can make a lot of money, right? And these companies make a lot of money, but and you can kind of be blinded by how much money they're making. But after you kind of put that aside, and that's why I'm glad we're having this conversation, because the financials, they tell you a lot, but they don't tell you the whole picture. Because if you put all the money aside and you look at how the company's being run, and the type of people that are working there and how they're working together, and structure and systems and governance and all of these things, you really start to see what is really going on. And sometimes that could be a really good thing, but sometimes it's not.
Well, and you don't want to be the company where it's not and you didn't know it before
Yeah.
it was discovered. And any significant transaction is going to involve some significant due diligence, and they
Yeah.
look at everything. And so it's important. That's very important.
Yes. So
You know,
what have we missed on the list? We talked.
well, I think we hit most of. Well, we didn't really talk a lot about infrastructure. We kind of went right over it. I just would
Okay.
say that is important.
hmm
And, if I were to use a super simple example, many companies start with QuickBooks as an infrastructure
Okay.
tool. That only takes you so far. When you get to the point where you have spreadsheets over here and this, that, and the other, you're beyond the point where you should have looked at what do I need to do as a next step in my ERP
hmm
decision to scale my business and to be
Okay.
prepared for that next level. And you can either kind of try to stay a little bit in front of it, or you find
hmm
yourself behind it and you're catching up. And so that is another thing that companies would be looking at from a evaluation up or down. And it's not just that; it's what kind of systems are you using for your people, for your
hmm
benefits. Have you really looked at the efficiencies that you could drive in your business with the right infrastructure tools?
Yeah.
And my goodness, that's an area that's just exploding, with AI
Yeah.
opportunities. And it's amazing to think about what the landscape's going to look like over the next 3 or 4 years with opportunities there. But frequently we go into companies that have not made those investments, and they,
hmm
well, it still works. Well, it works today,
hmm
but, it sort of works today and it isn't going to work tomorrow. And before we can actually execute perhaps an acquisition plan or whatever it is that they have in mind, you have to get the house in order. So you either
That's
take
right.
care of maintenance as you go, would be the way I would describe it, or you've got a big debt you have to take care of somewhere, and it's going to cost you time and money, and usually more than it would have if you did it as you went.
That's really well said, because I think that resonates. I had a guest on a few episodes ago. We were talking about software bloat, and that's what comes to mind when we're talking about this. Where you're bolting things together to make things work, and yes, it still technically works, but no one's happy. It takes 5 times longer than it should. You never really have just come back to solving these problems with more efficient tools or systems. So again, I want to kind of bring this back to like a DNA type of thing, because I see it where these small to mid-sized companies, they go where the leader is taking them, and if the leader it doesn't have a bent towards making things very efficient and solving those problems, they're not going to get the table time to talk about them, and those kind of problems are going to get pushed to the back because they're talking about the things they like to talk about. So I want to just lace this conversation with that as well, because if you're listening to this and that is something that your people have been bringing up to you, it might be time to address it.
Right. And to plan in the investment. And again, back to the whole idea of doing a strategic roadmap as early in the company life as you
Mm-hmm.
can plan those things out. You don't have to do them all in the next 6 months or the next 2 years. You
That's
can
right.
plan those investments out of both time and money over time. Um, so,
Yeah, no, that's a great point to make, because if someone is thinking about selling their company, I think a lot of times it happens for your small to mid-sized companies. It happens too late for them to really, because they kind of just said, okay, I'm in a place where I need to sell, or I'm in a place where I want to sell. I'm kind of over
mhm.
it. Whatever that personal situation is generally dictates the starting process of the sale. But if you're not in that situation and you have the idea that you want to sell at some point, um, a 1 year, 2 year, even 3 year timeline on putting a roadmap together, quarter by quarter, taking some of these things off, um, you know, building a better foundation for your culture, for your systems, for your client mix, all the things that we talked about, is going to pay dividends in the future. So this is great.
Well, I certainly think it's important and a good way to approach it.
Well, thanks for being on. This is really helpful, and I think very valuable for people to just kind of pull their head out of the financials and look at the rest of their company, but again through a financial lens, because it's not culture for culture's sake. It's not you know a system for system's sake. It's these things to improve your financials. Um,
Well, I would wrap up if I could just by saying I
sure.
completely agree with that. And the way we approach it is we start with here's what we think you're worth,
Hmm.
here's these 6 major areas. And right now, we evaluate you may be 60% toward what would be considered a really effective operation. You might be 35%, whatever.
Hmm.
Then we estimate the invested cost to make those improvements, and we can then look at what the improved valuation would be from doing it and give you an ROI on it. So, whether that's 6 months, 3 years, however long you want to take to do it,
Hmm.
that financial lens can be applied to any of these things that you decide to do. You can plan in advance what kind of
Hmm.
ROI you're going to get over doing it. So, not only is it the right thing to do, you can measure how much more value you're going to have for doing it.
I love that. Yeah, that's super valuable. Thanks for adding that in there. Well, this has been a great conversation. If I want to send people, well, I do want to send people, but if people want to find you, where can we send them?
Well, you can send them to our website. Again, my name is Ellen Wood. I'm the CEO of VCFO, and our website is super simple. It's vcfo.com.
Oh, great.
So,
You
yeah.
guys snagged that
And
one up. That's good.
well, we were the pioneer. Our original name, I'll tell you, was Virtual CFO, trademark name, but it's been borrowed heavily. So,
I bet. I bet.
yes. Anyway, so thank
So
you
you
again.
guys were the original virtual CFO.
We are the original Virtual CFO. We pioneered the whole concept of
Wow.
fractional financial and HR executives.
That's
So,
so great.
well, thank you. I think so.
Yeah, I love it. Okay. Well, hey, this has been good. We'll have to have you back and we can dig into these a little deeper.
Well, I appreciate it. Thank you very much.